You want to start with that instead of
Because
like
here's the
Faker?
thing, Monty. There's good and there's bad here. Like we can do the Faker side if you want to do the positive. There's some pretty bad stuff. Like I think we've got some pretty scathing topics on the T1 angle we're gonna have to get into. But let's do the good part first, then. So it is Faker's 10-year anniversary. He did almost win another championship 10 years later, which, by the way, is almost unthinkable longevity. I mean, I even said on Twitter, look, if you want to spin the positive, mate, just to be in 14 domestic finals, like I think I said on Twitter, bro, that like just sounds impossible. Never mind the idea someone's going to match it. Like, spoiler, nobody will ever match that record. Like, I don't think people realize how many years you have to play. 14 finals. That is, and by the way, he's won most of them. He's won like 8 or something, like, hasn't he? So like, that's unthinkable. Like that, just to even be in that many is impossible. It doesn't that stat is actually staggering to me, even as I think about it now.
Yeah, and it's also that he's won the 3 Worlds titles as well. The next closest is 2, which, you know, it doesn't seem that far away, but considering how short most players' careers are and how hard it is to stay on top in League of Legends, that is pretty remarkable. I mean, just as a player, I think, unfortunately for a lot of esports, and they haven't had necessarily the peak longevity that League of Legends has. Like, League of Legends was the most popular esport in the world when Faker started his career, and it continues to be the most popular esport in the world as Faker continues his career 10 years later.
You know, that part isn't a small detail, though, Monty. People forget, even the games like Quake and Counter-Strike that I'm a fan of, dude, they had highs and lows. Like, normally by the end, like, if you think of how StarCraft 2 now is, fat guys, StarCraft 2 is still going, but it's a tiny scene compared to what it was. And, like, if you're the guy who wins all the championships now in StarCraft 2, you will always wonder what would have happened if I'd have been at the top in 2013. If you're Faker, you never have to think about that. In fact, that's the coolest thing about League, isn't it? It's sort of stayed at the top the whole time. It's never really had the drop-off.
Right. And I think that has affected, obviously, players in other esports. So one of the things that, you know, we can say is like the early, you know, like the first Bonjour boxer was not lasting necessarily 10 years at the peak level of competition in Brood War. He was pretty quickly overtaken. Like within that 10-year time span, you know, from basically the start of Boxer 10 years later, we had Flash on top. So there was a period, there were lower periods of dominance. And I think what's remarkable about Faker is that, you know, 10 years later, he has made and won. He's made the finals in the last 3 finals, right? And he's won 1 of them, lost 2 of them, but he's still on top. And part of that is excellent team building that T1 has had, access to some of the best rookies. Like, it's difficult at some points to separate the legacy of Faker from the legacy of T1, because T1 itself, being the most prestigious brand in esports history and the most prestigious team, was always able to draw the good free agents, to draw the good rookie players into its program. They've had a lot of money due to their success, and they have a lot of money now due to the partnership that they have with Comcast. So he has had pretty good systemic advantages, but he himself has also maintained his level of play. And sure, he's had ups and downs over the years, but he appears to be back in extremely good form, except for maybe this playoff series where he had some pretty big issues. But over the course of the regular season, he was really quite extraordinary again. And even if I don't personally agree that he was the best mid laner in the LCK this split, I think he was unquestionably top 3. And certainly in the conversation, it's not egregious to consider him the best mid laner in the LCK. So it really is just remarkable to watch this guy's entire career. And one wonders if other esports were able to kind of maintain that peak and maintain that level of viewership, what would have happened? And like, maybe we will see that in Counter-Strike now. Like, it seems that Counter-Strike is such a stable scene that a player like Simple could potentially go 10 years. It's starting to feel like we might be able to start building these legacies for players.
I mean, here's the thing. I won't make a big tangent about it, but I actually reject the entire premise that people always build up like that about Simple. Like, here's the difference, guys. Faker wasn't the best player in the world 6 years in a row. Simple was the best player. And they're both team games. Like, that's the problem.
Yep.
I think the problem with the Faker one is this. Like, as you say, it's debatable if he's even the best his position, never even mind in T1 in the whole world. Like it to me, the amazing thing about Faker is he has two careers. He had one career where he was the bona fide star, the best player, your hard carry if you have the meta, and then the next second half of his career was this like team game approach where you put the right players around me, and it's like you say, I don't have to be the best. I've got to be just good enough that then all my experience kicks into play, and that will help us all win. Essentially, Faker's the super vet now in T1 for the last couple of years, isn't he? So, like, I agree. The cool thing to me, it's what I've always said about League is, it's one of the first games where I actually feel like I got sort of like the true sporting experience of following someone. Like, because as I say, there's no equivalent to that in sports. Like, there's no sport I was watching where it was huge, but then my favorite player had to play when it was a tenth as big, and maybe people didn't care anymore. And there was, there's none of that crap. Whereas esports, as you say, it really is more like you get like 3 or 4 really good years of an esport game, and then it's like if you were there too early, you didn't get any money, and there wasn't enough tournaments to play in like the early days, or you're there at the end, and there might be a whole bunch of tournaments, but all the prestige is gone, and you don't have the big stadium events. The coolest thing about League is you actually get to see, essentially, with this generation of players, Faker, Deft, how good actually can you be if it's just you're the only variable? There's always enough pro play, there's regions, like all that aspect. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Because that's the other thing, mate. When we talk about longevity normally, half the time it's scoffed because it's like Impact, but it's because he's in LCS for 8 of those years. Or it's like SOAS, but it's fucking top lane in Europe. Like you can sort of dick around and come back, and the extra curricular elements don't matter. To be the best and stay in LCK for 10 years, that's no joke. And by the way, that's where, like, even any complaints about nepotism wouldn't fly, Monty. If Faker had actually become legit shit, they would have found a way to move him out the team, I'm telling you guys. He would have been made an ambassador, or he'd have become the coach or something. They wouldn't have just kept him here forever. So it's not like he was just propped up. Like, he had to also reinvent his game a bunch of times.
Or they would have just let him go to China. They wouldn't have made him the offer.
Maybe they've got the money, sure.
Yeah, I mean, they just wouldn't have made the offer. And I think too, going back to the moment that Faker appeared on the scene, I think what was so remarkable about him was that this was obviously I cast Faker's debut game, where he played in Italy in the mid lane, and he was playing up against CJ Blaze at the time, which was one of the top teams in the LCK. And we didn't really know what to expect from Faker because he was considered like this solo queue god, but we had no idea how good he would be at the professional level, especially in team games. It can be difficult to translate positive solo queue experience into professional play and professional teamwork. And right off the bat, there was that famous game where he played the Nidalee into Ambition's Kha'Zix. Yes, Kha'Zix versus Nidalee was, in fact, a mid lane matchup in 2013.
Kha'Zix was a banger champion. If people don't know, mid lane, it was really strong. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex Hitch, very famous for playing that one. What was amazing was that he solo killed Ambition, who was considered one of the best mid laners in the world at that time. And then he roamed bottom and killed Captain Jack and Lustboy on a turret dive with his bot lane, snowballed the game, and ended up winning. And there are very few times, I think, in the history of esports where a hyped up player comes in and then just instantly delivers an insane performance in their very first game of competition. I don't know what if you can think of any, but like Faker's career just began with this astounding thunderclap, and it proceeded throughout that entire season. I mean, there were games where when he was playing MVP Blue, for instance, which contained like Acorn and Heart and Deft. These were all players that would become very famous. Easy Hoon as well. He forced us, you were allowed to surrender, and he forced a surrender at 20 minutes by playing Death Fire Grasp LeBlanc and just one-shotting everybody on the map, getting a massive gold lead, and then deleting people. So it was really quite shocking to see just how good this guy was right from the get-go. He still needed to work on his teamwork to a certain degree, and the team was all very young around him as well. And so they didn't win the spring split, but they did win their first title in summer, which is when the famous Faker versus Ryu, Zed versus Zed outplay occurred. And then from there, it was just basically, a series of titles. They went and won Worlds, came back, and then immediately had the undefeated winter split in 2013, 2014, where they went through the entire tournament and the bracket without losing a single game. So it is, I don't know if you know any instances, Thorin, of players who were kind of just superstars right from their first game.
The
Like,
problem
just
is this. What makes Faker unique is that he was not only himself individually extremely good. Like, I'll give you a piece of trivia people won't remember. That year was the first year they ever did an all-star tournament that was voted for by the fans. And when they did the fan voting, even though Ambition got voted the mid laner, there was a very real discussion at the time of should it be Faker, even though it's his rookie split. Like, that was like a real discussion because, like Monte says, the eye test was crazy. Like that LeBlanc game, when you saw it, you were like, no joke, pause the game. That's the best game of League of Legends ever played, and it's his first fucking split of the game. Like, if you go back and watch that, it still holds up now. Like, it looks insane. The moves he's put, his mechanics were cracked already. So already, right? Here's the key thing: in a team game, he individually was, if not the best, almost the best. But then, crucially, the fact that they then just won the first year, mate, that's what no one else can compare to. Like, I can tell you in CS:GO that like Ziwu was incredible his first year, but his team wasn't going to win the major, mate. They weren't even in the playoffs of a major. Like, they were in no position where they were going to win. Like, they had a chance, but they didn't. I could take anyone. Flash. It took Flash a couple of years to get to like a final of an OGN or something, you know, like that's the problem. A lot of people can do it as in like they are a prodigy. They appear in the game. They're super good individually, but the idea that you also like sort of get the team aspect sorted and then have the success as a team, that's almost unthinkable. You can even make it bigger, mate. Even in sports, that almost never happens. Like that, like, because for example, spoiler, like Tom Brady wasn't some fucking stud quarterback when he won, guys. Like, remember, he wasn't even supposed to be in the fucking team. It was supposed to be Drew Bledsoe. So that doesn't count. Then if you go with like LeBron was mega individually, but he was miles from a championship for years and years. About the closest you could do was maybe like Magic Johnson because he won the first year he came in. But even then, he was playing with the person who not long after went on to have like the most points in NBA history. So he was a somewhat of a like secondary figure. So I don't think there's anyone, mate. Because as I say, he's done it in a team game, but he was both the best individually and had the best team. Like that's so crazy. So it's also why if you now bring it back to today, look, he's not in contention to be the best player now. But the idea is even still mixing it up with the peers that are. I mean, remember the trophies and they are the guys who are the ones in status for that title. I mean, he goes to MSI now where he's going to play against Knight, who's another person who's supposed to be the best. So the idea you're even still in the mix that year later is ridiculous. That's a testament in itself, I think.
Yeah, I also think that Faker did benefit from the fact that it was very early on in the scene and there wasn't, you know, a robust kind of tier 2 at that point in time. The tier 2 at that time in Korea was basically the tier 1 where players would form their own teams or join minor organizations, then play in champions run by OGN, and then they get knocked out early, and then like the big teams like T1, KT, CJ, all of these teams would then acquire those players later on down the line. So the farm system was basically the early stages of the tournament. But the thing is, Faker didn't even start on one of these farm teams. He didn't even start on a lower brand. He literally started on T1. T1 scouted him. T1 got him. T1, I assume, molded him to a certain degree, even though he was just an exemplary talent. But I don't think you would be likely to see this anymore. But to your point, Thorin, what's so crazy is that he, it's not like he was competing on a high school team. He went straight from, the equivalent is like, he went straight from practicing his, if he was a basketball player, like going down the street and playing pickup games into the NBA and then being the best player in the NBA. That is nuts. That is just, it was so difficult for me to process how this could be possible when it was happening, especially somebody who's watched esports for years and years and years. Because like you say, even in 1v1 games, it didn't happen. And 1v1 is the most likely place for it to occur. Yes. Because the ladder isn't that different from professional play if you're very good at laddering. Obviously, the mentality of playing a best of 7 in StarCraft is different than just kind of hitting next game and getting a random opponent. You do have to prep more for a specific player's styles and tendencies and everything like that. But to do this in a team game and to do this right out of solo queue with some maybe minimal scrim time, maybe a couple months of scrim time max, and then debut and beat one of the best teams in the world, and then continue to make a run to third place and then actually winning a title. And it's also the way the title was won. In summer, it was a reverse sweep. He was basically a rookie player, and showing that level of mental fortitude to go down 0-2 in a series, switch their style, and then come back and win the final game in such a dramatic fashion.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.